This interactive date picker in Tableau lets users select both a time period like day and a specific range within that period like Tuesday the 12th to view the sales trends for all the transactions on that date. In this example, I use day, month, and quarter, but you can define any time periods you need, including overlapping ones. And it's highly customizable from the time periods that you define to the responsiveness of the buttons and access. So it provides users with an intuitive and flexible way to filter and analyze the data. I'll start by creating a new worksheet for the time period. Then I'll create a calculative field for the time period. And I'll say if the order date is greater or equal to date add the day minus 11 today, and the date of the order date is less than or equal to today, then the text day. Since the other lines are going to have the same structure, I'll type else if, and then I'll copy our first line and paste it. And everywhere there's a day, I'm going to change this to month. I'll do the same thing for the third line, and this time I'll change day to quarter. This formula categorizes the order date into time periods based on how recent the date is compared to today. So in this version, I'm basically checking for the last 12 days, last 12 months, and last 12 quarters. And the nice thing about this is it's super customizable, so you can do partial time periods like 6 months, or you can do time periods that overlap like this. And because this is how I want our buttons to be displayed, I'm going to type display in front of our calculated field title. Then I'll right-click on the display time period to duplicate it. And I'll edit this one to be just the time period. The only thing here I need to do is add month and quarter after day, and add quarter after month. And this is because these are overlapping time periods, so I want to make sure that we're capturing all the dates within each time period. And we need a variable to store these, so I'm going to create a parameter for the time period. For the data type, I'll choose a string, and in the allowable values, I'll create a list. I'll add values, go to our data source, and choose time period. Don't use the display time period because that's only for our view. And the last calculated field I'll need for the time periods is the time period select. This will be time period equals the time period parameter, and will return true when it's selected. To build the structure of our time period buttons, I'll move time period into the columns. And there's a null here because there's order dates within our dataset that don't fit into these time periods. So I'm going to pull time period into the filters to exclude the nulls. Then I'll move the display time period into the marks and make this a label. So you can see here the display time period is the value that I want to show in our time period buttons. But the value I want to actually filter on is the time period. And that's because I want to account for any overlapping dates. To make the buttons responsive to whether they're selected, I'll move our time period select field into the marks and make this a color. Then for formatting, I'll remove the time period header, and I'll format the worksheet so that the font is a little bit bigger and bold. For the alignment, I want to center these horizontally. For shading, I want to set this to none, and for the borders, I want to remove the row divider. To make these buttons interactive, I'll go to a dashboard and add our time period worksheet. I'll hide the title of the worksheet, and I want to set this to the entire view. Then I'll go to the dashboard tab at the top and add an action. I want to add a change parameter action for the time period. For the source sheet, I only want time period checked off, and I want to target the time period parameter using the time period as the source field, not the display. Now when I click on one of these buttons, you can see it goes from false to true, and the color changes from blue to orange. We don't need the parameter anymore, so I'm going to remove that, and then I'll edit the colors of our legend, and for false, I'll choose a gray color. And since true is going to represent selected, I'll make it black. And now that we have time period buttons, we need to set up the range for each time period. On this new worksheet, I'll create a calculated field for the period range. And these formulas are kind of long, so I'm just going to copy paste them in here, but I have them linked in the description. At a high level, this formula dynamically formats the order date based on the chosen time period. And we're really only going to use this field to fill in our parameter. You could use this field in the view, but I want to create custom lines for our buttons. So this calculated field is going to be for displaying the range, and it's only going to be the first line of text within our button. And when I finish these, I'm going to put them in the view so you can see what they look like, and that way you can customize them any way you want by adjusting the formulas. So I'm going to create another one for the second line. And again, you can find these in my description. I just don't want to waste time typing out each of these formulas. So as I start adding these to the view, you can see how it's just formatting the dates in different ways. Sometimes it's taking the first 3 letters of the month, and sometimes it's taking the last 2 digits of the year. Next, I need to create a parameter to store our period range values. I'll make the data type a string, and I want the current value to be empty, because we're going to fill it in anyways using the period range formula. And the last calculated field we'll need is for identifying whether the period range is selected or not. So this will be period range equals the period range parameter. Then to get a clearer picture, I'll pull time period into the filters, choose a condition, and do this by formula. I'll type contains time period, comma the time period parameter. This way we're looking at just one time period. And if I go back to time period worksheet, I can see that month is selected. So this is what the first and second line text will look like within our period range for the month time period. Since we need the period range for our action, I'm going to pull this into the marks. Then I'll move the first and second line text into the columns. And I want both the shape and the text to be responsive to whether it's selected or not. So to do this, I'll type 0 twice into the rows, because this gives us 2 marks to work with. For the first mark, I'll change this to a shape. And I want the period range select field to determine the shape. For the second mark, I'll change this to text. And I'll pull in our first and second line into the marks and make these both text. And to make the color of the text responsive to whether it's selected, I'll pull the select field into the marks and make this a color. Then to get the text centered within our shape, I'll right-click on one of our sum of zeros and make this a dual axis. For formatting, I'll start by removing all the headers. Then I'll format the worksheet, and for shading, I'm going to remove the shading of the worksheet. For borders, I'll remove the row and column divider. And for lines, I'll remove the 0 lines for the sheet and the grid lines for the rows. To make these buttons functional, I'll go back to the dashboard and add our period range worksheet. I'll hide the title of the worksheet, and I want to make sure this is set to the entire view. Then on the dashboard tab, I'll add an action. And I want to add a change parameter action for the period range. For the source sheet, only have period range checked off. And I want to target the period range parameter using the period range as the source field. That's why, even though we didn't use this field in our view, I wanted to include it in the marks so that we could use it in the action. So now when I click on one of our buttons, you can see it goes from a circle shape to a square shape, and the text color goes from blue to orange. To change the shape and colors so that they make more sense, I'll go back to our period range worksheet, click on the first mark, and go to Shapes. And I'll choose this custom shape palette that I loaded in here, but I have another video for how to create these. I created these images in Canva, and I'll link them in the description. For false, I want to choose the lighter color button, and for true, I want to choose the darker color button. Then you can use the size slider in the marks to increase the size of these buttons. Next, I'll edit the colors for the legend. And for false, I want this to be black. And for true, I want this to be white. That way they stand out against the button colors. Then to format the text itself, I'll click on text within the second marks, and I want to edit this so that the text is Tableau regular. And I don't know why it does this sometimes, but I'll move the second line after the first, and then I'll make the first line bold. And this is what I mean by it's fully customizable, because we've not only tailored the time periods and their ranges, but we also have control over the text itself, the color of the text, and the style of the buttons. And we've made them responsive to indicate whether it's selected or not. And while the time period filters the period range is going to filter the visual, which is going to be a trend of sales. So on this new worksheet, I just need to create one calculated field for displaying the access. I'll paste this one in as well, but this is basically taking our period ranges and breaking them down one level further. So for example, if you click on a day within the period range, the axis will show one level down, which is the hours and minutes of a day. To represent the trend, I'll build a gradient rounded bar chart. So I've got the axis in the columns, and I'll move measure values to the rows. I'll type 0 within our measure values and remove all the ones that we don't need, so we're left with 0 in sales. Then I'll move sales after 0. Within the marks, I'll make this a line, and I'll make the measure names the path of the line. This will give us the rounded bar chart effect. To add gradients, I'll move measure names into the marks and make this a color. I'll edit the colors in the legend, and for 0, I'm going to choose a darker pink since this is going to be the bottom of our axis. For sales, I'll choose a lighter pink. Then you can use the size slider in the marks to make the bars a little bit bigger. Right now this is showing all of the hours and minutes, but to have it respond to the selected time periods and range, I'll move time period into the filters. I'll choose a condition and do this by formula. I'll type contains time period, comma the time period parameter. And the reason I need to use contains here is because we're using overlapping time periods. Then I'll pull period range into the filters and choose a condition again. I'll do this by formula and type period range equals the period range parameter. And we can't see anything right now because nothing's selected, so I'm going to go back to our sales worksheet and select Wednesday the 6th. Now on our trend worksheet, we can see all the different times of sales and the amounts of sales for Wednesday the 6th. I'll format this real quick by removing the values header and hiding the field label. I'll also format the worksheet, and for the font, I want to choose a darker color. For shading, I'll choose none. And for the lines, I'll remove the 0 lines for the sheet, and the axis rulers for the sheet, and the grid lines for the rows. Then on the sales dashboard, I'll add our trend worksheet. I'll hide the title of the worksheet, and I want to position this under our buttons. I'm also going to rotate the labels. So now when I click on the month time period, and I click on a specific month like October 2024, so you can see the axis adjusted, and now we can see the sales for each day in October 2024. And the last thing we need to do for the trend is sort these period ranges, because you can see December 23 comes after October 2024. So I'll go back to the period range worksheet, and one way we can do this is to pull our second line ahead of our first line. That way it's sorting by the year first and then the month. And you can see this even works for quarters. But for day, it looks like it works, but it actually doesn't. And I'll show this by editing our formulas real quick to look at the last 17 days rather than 12. You can see the 29th of the previous month is coming after the 1st of this month. So one way to fix this is to create a calculated field for sorting the period ranges. I'll copy paste this in here, and we really only need it for the day, but I want to just do it for the month and quarter as well. And this basically makes it take the month into consideration first, before looking at the second and first line for day. So when I drag this to the beginning of our columns, you can see it separates it into 10 and 11, which is October and November 1st. Then it sorts it by the second line, which is the actual days. And when I change the time period around, you can see this holds no matter what. So I'm just going to go in and change these back to the last 12 days. And on the dashboard, I can play around with the different time periods and the period ranges to see how it interacts with our trend. I purposely made a mistake because the first time I built this, I made the same mistake, and while it was really small, it took me a lot of time to figure out why it was happening. So today is November 14th, but when I select November 2024 within our period range, you can see there's only 13 days showing. And even though November 14th exists within the day time period, it's missing from the month view. And that's because order date is a date time field. So to fix this and avoid similar issues, anytime you're comparing today to a date time field like order date, wrap the order date in the date function first. And this will convert the date time field to a date. And now when I go back to the dashboard, you can see we have the current date within our month time period. And then I'll move these around a little bit to position them. I created this little visual to help understand how the interactive date picker works. So for month, for example, we're looking at the last 12 months. And the first level of text is the name of the month, and the second level is the year. So the trend we're seeing is sales for that month, and the axis is each day of that month. The last thing I'll add to this visual is a title, so I'll bring in a text object for the trend. I'll make this Tableau regular, size 14, and black. And in presentation mode, you can see what our interactive date picker will look like within the server. This visual is great for when you need flexibility in viewing the data, and it gives users a quick and intuitive way to filter by date.